Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers.
And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 15, Episode 136. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday. Steelers Nation, less than 1 week from the start of OTAs for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Still pretty quiet, pretty calm out there as Aaron Rodgers' watch continues as we get close to some pretty meaningful Pittsburgh Steelers off-season action. Dave, how you doing?
Hey, good morning. How are you doing? It's your birthday today, so happy birthday to you. How old does that make you? You're like 24 or 25 now, I think, right?
I wish. It's the big 3-2.
3-2.
So I'm a grizzled veteran right now, I think.
I hear you. I remember when I was a kid and 32 and 30 seems so far away, especially for someone like me. What year does that make you born in?
I was born 93.
93. Good Lord, I had broken most of the 10 commandments by then, sometimes twice. 93. Goodness gracious, it makes me feel old there. But happy birthday. Hopefully you have a great day today. And I don't know if we got all that much to talk about today, but we'll certainly, we got a list of some things here.
Someone not having a great day today probably is Lecitus Smith, the now former Pittsburgh Steelers offensive lineman. He was waived by the team yesterday, just 2 months after being claimed off waivers from the New England Patriots. Smith, a former sixth-round pick of the Arizona Cardinals, had appeared in 18 games, handful of starts, mostly with Arizona his rookie season. Unclear exactly why he was released. Maybe Pittsburgh didn't like what they saw during the Phase 1, Phase 2 of the offseason program, so Pittsburgh should now have 2 open roster spots. And not that Smith was going to be the cure-all for offensive line depth, but we've really pointed to that. Our Jonathan Heitritter wrote an article yesterday outlining how weak the depth is, and now minus Smith, that depth is a little bit weaker.
Yeah, you never know the real reason behind some of these waivings, but that one came kind of out of the blue on Tuesday there, but not totally shocking. They had claimed him off waivers not too terribly long ago, right?
About 2 months ago.
Yeah. So let's see. You've got obviously the OTAs getting underway next week. I think a week from Tuesday there, and you've still got a couple of roster spots open now at this point. But as you mentioned, the offensive line depth, especially at the tackle position, hasn't been overly great, and it'll be interesting to see once this team potentially gets through OTAs and all and starts heading towards training camp. You know, if we do see one of those veterans out there on the street, you know, someone like a Jedrick Wills, or I think even DJ Humphries is still out there. I think there was initially a report that Humphries had signed, and then then I think word came out that he didn't agree to terms. So anyway, it'll be, you know, once again, the Steelers will go through OTAs. It'll be interesting to see if anybody is added to the 90-man roster before then, and if not, if they add anybody before you know, training camp obviously gets underway there. So you know, we did have a transaction come out of the blue on yesterday, so there is that. He was not waived injured or anything like that, according to the transaction sheet.
And Smith was an interior offensive lineman, primarily a guard, played a little bit of center as well. So Pittsburgh usually carries 9 offensive linemen on their initial 53-man roster. As the roster currently stands today, can we get to 9 with any level of confidence without just putting a player on there for the sake of putting a player on there? You have the starting 5 of Broderick Jones, Isaac Seumalo, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick, Troy Fautanu. How do you get to 4 more behind them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see. Calvin Anderson was obviously added during the offseason, or re-added during the offseason, but he didn't play whole, and he's you know, consider him more of a journeyman more than anything, and I certainly wouldn't pencil his name in.
Who are the locks to be the backups? This is a good place to start. Who has the best odds to make it behind the front 5?
Oh, let's see here.
McCollum, you would assume, would be
Yeah,
pretty
McCollum,
confident.
at least right now. I mean, he was on the roster last year, and he seems to be the most experienced center. So you have to think that he's got at least an inside shot to hold that spot again. Max Sharping was on the roster for a good chunk of the season last year. But I don't know if I'd consider him a lock at this point. Spencer Anderson's been around a couple of seasons now. They seem to like his versatility. So I would lean to him potentially being part of that group. And beyond that, I mean it's wide open if we're
Hmm.
being totally honest. Behind, let's see, the starting five and Ryan McCollum at this point, I think it's wide open. I think it'd be foolish to kind of write some of those names in pen, and we'll see if this team goes out and gets a more veteran type center. I certainly would have to hate to go a full game with Ryan McCollum at center. I mean, I'm sure he could get him out of a game, but I don't think he's a guy that you want to lean on to make multiple starts, especially if you could get someone else on the cheap that's got a little bit more experience. And he's definitely not a guy that I don't think I want to see at guard very much either. Should that rise there? And Spencer Anderson, obviously is more guard than he is tackle. It feels like at this point. So yeah, it's going to be one of the questions that this team's going to have to answer throughout the rest of the offseason here is what is as you mentioned, if they do carry 9 again, what those extra 4 are going to look like.
McCollum held his own, filling in for Zach Frazier in those, what was it, 1.5, 2 starts after Frazier went down in the Raiders game against New York, and they gave him help as any team would against Dexter Lawrence. But I think there's confidence in McCollum to be that spot starter, kind of the Mason Rudolph of the offensive line, this veteran that can start for a couple games. You don't want him starting for 10, but can he start for 1 or 2? Yeah, I think he can. Although it's funny, he was profiling as a practice squad or lifer for the first couple of years in Pittsburgh, and then made it last year with some of the injuries to the offensive line, and then played fairly well when given the opportunity. Anderson's a guy that will probably make it. Like you said, he can play both guard spots, can play right tackle, could even play center in a pinch. But he's a guy that they tried to, look towards first when Malu had the pec injury right before the season last year. It didn't work out. They put in McCormick instead, and so this is a guy that has had a starting chance and lost that opportunity. So what is the ceiling on Spencer Anderson is a fair question, but those two guys probably have the best odds of making it. Interior wise, Calvin Anderson looking right now to be your number 3 tackle. That gets you to 8, and then that 9th spot is even more wide open at tackle. Gareth Warren, Dylan Cook, interior offensive line, Stephen Jones. There's just a whole lot of names you could suggest there, really, the rest of the group. So yeah, it's a real weakness, and for a team that has smartly invested so much in the starting offensive line, this group has to develop, but there has been investments made, and they had good depth last year, which was needed. To see the lack of depth this year is concerning.
Yeah, you got Doug Nestor out there going to probably be pushing. He was around last year, I think, on the practice squad. Don't know much about Stephen Jones overall out of Oregon. Oh Lord, and we've talked up Gareth Warren quite a bit since he's come into the picture here. So yeah, we got some names to certainly watch, and I will be paying close attention to your line rotations once training camp gets underway, as I usually do.
I would love for Dylan Cook to really be the guy I thought he could be last year. Had that good first summer training camp with the team, was capped on the 53 because Pittsburgh was concerned they were going to lose him in waivers as a young, talented offensive tackle. The last year he gets hurt. He comes off of IR. He gets put on the 53 and then turned around and cut right after that and goes to the practice squad, doesn't play a single snap. So this is kind of really, put up or shut up time for a guy like Dylan Cook, who I think is talented and made that college conversion from quarterback to offensive line. There was some athleticism, some nice hand use in his game, but last year was a lost season, and he's got to be able to recapture what I saw glimpses from him back in, I guess that would have been 2023.
So it's going to be an interesting summer for him as well, too, and potentially a make or break one.
And even adding veterans, as you suggested, which I'm in favor of, but it's a shallow pool. It always is for offensive line, and especially this time of year. Maybe something at cutdowns you could add, but how many teams are cutting good offensive linemen? Almost nobody, because everyone's trying to capture and scrounge around for the couple talented offensive linemen that are out there. There's such a scarcity at the position. So you better hope this front five develops, obviously, but you better hope they stay healthy as well.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned, once this team gets to mandatory minicamp and out of mandatory minicamp, as we've seen over the years, the 90 that they end the mandatory, or 91 this year that they'll end the mandatory minicamp with, there's potentially the initial 53-man roster. It's probably going to include one or two guys that weren't even with the team through mandatory minicamp. Now, we saw this team a couple of years ago trade for a couple of guys right there at the deadline. Who was that interior offensive lineman that ended up? I don't even think he played, but two special team snaps that they got from, who was it, Miami or
When was this?
couple of years ago, the offensive lineman that they traded for,
Jesse Davis.
Yeah, Jesse Davis. You could see something like that, but you're right. Normally if linemen around the league are in that final, that are veterans that are part of that final cut list, those guys usually get signed elsewhere. We don't usually see the Steelers make a higher profile signing like that. So the list, as Jonathan even wrote in his recent post there, it's slim pickings as it is right now, and it'll only get slimmer as you get through training camp, and there's going to be injuries around the league and all like that.
I bet you one thing Pittsburgh will do is after the UFL finishes up their season, which will be in a couple of weeks. I think they're in conference championship games right now, so maybe that's 2 weeks from now. You're going to see an offensive lineman from the UFL come over to Pittsburgh. I mentioned Zach Banner as one name just because of the ties, and he seems healthy again. I have watched literally 0 seconds at the UFL this year, so I don't know who's all out there, but I think Pittsburgh will look to the spring leagues to try to infuse some talent.
I wonder who is PFF's highest ranking offensive lineman at this point. Let me see if I can, at least from a blocking standpoint, let me see if I can pull that up.
If you can't tell, this is a classic May 21st episode where there's not a lot going on. So we're looking up UFL offensive lineman grades. But I do think, that's going to be one other area, because you got some guys that have some talent, probably some NFL background. They're playing. You got evaluation on them. It's probably a better place to go than the nothingness that is that free agency pool right now in the NFL.
Let's see. It looks like center Jack Kramer is the highest graded offensive lineman. Plays for Houston. Yasser Durant, 6'7", tackle. I think originally drafted by the Chiefs, is highly graded overall. Let's see, as far as pass blocking, he's the leading pass blocking tackle. Oh, who else? Ryan Nelson, a tackle, looks like.
Got a former Steeler on this list.
Who's that?
Kellen Dish. He
was okay.
In Pittsburgh for a hot minute. He's the number 3 rated tackle.
All right.
And Zach Banner sitting 11th out of the 23 qualifiers that I pulled up. So, yeah, there's a couple names on there, but it looks like Durant and Nelson easily have the highest grades for whatever that's worth. And those guys, like you said, Durant's had a little bit of NFL experience. I'm not sure Nelson's background, probably somewhere in a camp at least. So I bet you that's where Pittsburgh starts looking.
All right. We'll see if that comes to fruition here.
All right, Dave, the NFL is holding their second set of owner meetings for the year. They had the big one, the main one in March, but then they come back in May to vote on anything outstanding. As of this recording, we know the NFL and the Detroit Lions, who made the proposal, has withdrawn the resolution to reorder the playoff seeding, which would have been based off of record and not based off divisional winners. This one felt like it had really no chance to pass. I know Pittsburgh came out very much against the proposal, would have needed 24 votes to pass. It probably had not even half of that if I had to guess. It sounds like the belief is the NFL will get this to happen eventually, maybe when the NFL goes to an 18-game season, but there'll be no change to playoff format and seeding for 2025.
All right. And when you see stuff like that pulled, it's usually because they don't have the backing, right?
Yeah, it was withdrawn, so it wouldn't fail as a vote. So you don't get the headline of the NFL where this vote has failed. It just simply has been withdrawn. There was a really good point made too about if you change this format where basically winning your division doesn't guarantee you a top four seed in a home game, then you're gonna have to change the scheduling format too, because that's all based off if you finish first place and your division or your next year's schedule is based off of other division winners. I believe you can probably explain it better than I can, but you can't basically take away the incentive to win the division. That also comes with the quote unquote penalty of winning your division of having a harder schedule. So there's got to be a lot of changes made if and when this reseeding does pass.
Yeah. Do you think it does at some point?
The insiders believe it probably will happen. My understanding from what I've read is that Roger Goodell wants this to happen, and generally what Roger Goodell wants is what he gets eventually. So I bet that day will come, but not this year, maybe next year.
All right.
The Tush Push, as of this recording, seems to be very much uncertain. My belief is it's going to pass in the sense of the Tush Push will be banned, and really, in a broader point, all mechanism of pushing players forward will be banned. So I don't think the resolution, in fact, it's not to ban the Tush Push explicitly, but the action of pushing a teammate forward to gain yardage will be outlawed. So I know this thing is still being voted on as we speak, as of 10:22 a.m. Wednesday morning. Apparently, Jason Kelce, the former Eagles center, is in Minneapolis to make the case for keeping the Tush Push and not banning the play, not banning the mechanism. Either way, it's not going to affect Pittsburgh a ton because they occasionally use the Tush Push formation, but not often. But this one seems like it's going to be one of the closest votes in quite some time.
Yeah, they're bringing out the big guns in Kelce, and I think Kelce had said during one of his podcast episodes, I don't know, not too terribly long ago, said he'd come out of retirement and still play if all he had to do is run the tush push 80 times a game. So there doesn't seem to be the data at least to back up the whole injury aspect of this, and I'm sure that will be the primary focus that the Eagles try to make within all this. And I imagine teams within the Eagles division and the NFC will be trying to push for that thing to get eliminated. Hey, if they do anything, I would imagine it'll go back to look. You cannot in any situation push or pull or move a ball carrier forward.
And the Steelers are apparently in favor of banning this play. Mike Tomlin cited the fact that on the field goal rush team, they can't push and propel themselves forward. So that's already one part of the rule that says you can't do that. This was a rule back in the early 2000s that was rescinded in 2004. I'm not really sure why it was back then. So the Steelers seem to be in favor, again, needing 24 votes to pass, and Pittsburgh seems to be part of that group.
All right, so we should have that answer here pretty soon, I would think. Maybe by the time we're done with the podcast. I think some words starting to come out now that the owners just passed a proposal to allow for onside kicks to be declared at any point in a game when a team is behind. So last year was the first year of the new kickoff where you could only do that in the fourth quarter. So it looks like they're loosening that up a little bit.
And for some reason, the onside kicks will come from the 34 instead of the 35. Why? No idea. But that is apparently the change, another change being made there.
That's interesting. I wonder what the reasoning behind that is.
Yeah, no idea. Are you in favor of the tush push being banned? I know the rule again is for pushing in all circumstances, but this really applies to the tush push. Let's just call it the tush push ban. Are you in favor of getting rid of it or keeping it?
I mean, if there's more injury data behind it, and yeah, I realize that the league will probably look at this as if we wanted to play rugby, we'd play rugby. We just don't want scrums out there constantly being pushed and all like that. But the fact, my view on this is if you don't want the tush push to be successful, then stop it. And I know that's easier said than done, But are we going to continue to see innovative things around the NFL if one team's able to do them better than others? Are you opening up a Pandora's box to try to take some of those things away? And I realize that this is kind of a unique situation here because it is more rugby-ish than anything. But my view on it has always been, if you don't have the injury data to back it up, and look, they're going to try to, well, like I said, they're going to try to uh, uh, encircle this with just more than just a tush push. They're gonna end up saying you just can't push any player forward in
Mhm.
any situation. Can't drag them forward into the end zone and all like that. That's the way they'll try to ultimately phrase this. I'm fairly certain here, but my view is has always been, if you don't want to play us to be successful against you, just stop it.
This one, like you said, is really tough to stop, but I doesn't mean you ban the play just because it's really tough to stop. And the NFL seems to be citing player safety as their concern, but they admit there's no data that suggests there's a player safety issue. Now, Mike Tomlin would say there's a limited sample size, and that's true. Only a couple hundred or the tens of thousands of plays that take place during an NFL season league wide, but you can't argue player safety without the data or at least some obvious point of this is a clearly unsafe play. I don't really see it as a clearly unsafe play. It's a scrum, but that's tackling. It's football, so I don't see the reason to ban it other than basically teams saying we can't stop it, and so we're going to make up some reasons to ban the play. I do think though, while this one will primarily apply to the tush push, you'll see offensive linemen push running backs and receivers
Mhm.
downfield end of a play, and so I guess that would also now be a penalty.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Now you can't. I would imagine if they're going to ban this type stuff, they're going to try to ban all of it.
Well, yeah, that's the resolution. The resolution does not mention the tush push. It mentions the overall mechanism of pushing players, assisting players at any, area of the field, pushing them forward or lifting them in the air. So
I
there,
mean,
there could be,
if there's any opportunity for a player to really get hurt in these situations, it's an offensive lineman getting a 10-yard
yeah.
head start from behind the pile. And look, Chris Kimohatu made a living out of trying to peel people off piles, right? So I mean, if you want to look at that aspect of it, yeah, you might say, hey, someone's legs could get caught up underneath and all like that, especially when you have more of a running start in that. So, yeah, I would imagine that there should be penalties for even offensive linemen, and even dragging guys into the end zone.
Hmm.
If you're going to make a rule, you might as well encompass all that.
Right. Well, I assume it will be a penalty, assuming that this proposal passes. But there is actually, I think, a bigger injury about those plays in space where the lineman runs in when the player's kind of being held up, and you've seen a lot of head injuries when guys will just fly in and their helmets collide. We've seen concussions and some pretty serious collisions in those moments. So, if there's a player safety argument to be made about anything, that's where I would make it, not on the tush push itself. So we'll see. Do you believe? I know we may get our answer, as you said mid podcast, but do you think this proposal will pass?
I have a feeling it will. I have a feeling that it will. And look, are we going to start seeing quicker whistles sometimes when a running back stood up in a pile and ends
Hmm.
up bouncing out of there, or ends up getting? How many times have we seen a pile move forward down there near the goal line that kind of less blatant, yeah, where it just becomes a scrum and everybody's just trying to push on both sides of it, and the running back goes 4 yards into the end zone. Are we going to start? Are referees going to be instructed to be quicker whistles on supposed forward progress?
And if that happens, is that a penalty? Is that 10-yard run become a 10-yard penalty? And so coaches are going to have to teach linemen, you can't go in there and try to help anymore because we're going
Right.
to get called for it. So I think there's actually a pretty bigger fundamental change than just the tush push. That's the reason why this is even being brought up in the first place. That's what the play that's being targeted. But yeah, we see those moments. How many times with Najee do we see those moments where he would just stay on his feet and the whole
Right.
lineman would encircle him and they would gain an extra 5, 7, whatever yards. And so that's going to be really interesting. And what's going to be considered pushing? Will teams argue, well, the back stayed on his feet, so they weren't really pushing him because the back was staying up. I don't know. This one could actually get kind of kind of interesting, dude.
Yeah, some slippery slopes, right?
Yeah, for sure. So we'll see. I don't know if anything else is on the table. The NFL did yesterday officially pass a resolution to allow NFL players to participate in the Olympics coming up here in 2028 for flag football. Who knows what that'll look like? I'm not sure what Steelers could even potentially be in the mix. I don't think any Steelers have overtly expressed interest in the Olympics. I'm sure some would love to. Anyone would, I'm sure, would love to if called upon, but that is now going to be a thing come 2028, and how the NFL navigates, that, and what teams will let players go, and the injury risks and all that kind of stuff will be interesting to watch play out.
I can't help but think back to years ago ahead of the Pro Bowl game when they had the beach, I don't know, flag football or something like that. Who was a Patriots running back that tore up his knee? This has been more.
I'm not sure.
It's probably been 20 years ago now. But I think, look, I'm in favor of athletes and pro athletes being able to compete in the Olympics and all like that. I mean, you've seen basketball do it for years, and I guess hockey to some degree, and I'm for it overall. I just think the biggest pushback was owners worrying about their players getting injured, within this. So, but I'm for it, as a whole. I just think owners will be biting their nails, just not wanting a player to tear up their knee, in the type of situation,
Sure.
and end up costing them a season. And I could definitely understand that side of it.
These the Olympics will take place in the summer, obviously, shortly before, I think, training camp begins. I don't know the exact timeline. Do we know exactly when the 2028 Olympics will take place? Are there dates on when that will occur? I want to say July.
I haven't even looked on that, to be honest with you.
Google's telling me July 14th to July 30th, so right before training camp opens up across the NFL. So even a relatively minor injury, a hamstring pull, something like that, would have a player down for the start of the summer.
Yep.
What I think will happen here is you're not going to get as many star big names as people think. I think you're going to get some backup NFL players. Typically, I don't really watch a lot of flag football, but typically the guys that play are smaller. You don't have these big giant players out there, so it's the joystick receivers, the undersized receiver, running back type of guy. So like an Isaiah McKenzie has expressed interest. I think that's the type of guy that will be playing in the Olympics, less so the Tyreek Hills and the star players, because either they don't necessarily fit the style of flag football and what's the best skill set for that, and also the injury risk of teams saying, we don't really want you to go out there and potentially wreck your knee in a flag football game.
I don't know. I think a guy like Minkah Fitzpatrick might like to try it.
I'm sure he would. I mean, and maybe, I don't know, what is a good skill set to play defense. I know it's 5-on-5. You're playing both sides of the football, but how old will Minkah be in 2028?
Yeah, that's true.
He's going to be 31-ish. It's probably a young man's game. So I don't know if Minkah Fitzpatrick, hey, I'm all for it if he does. I have no idea how they're even going to choose this and pick the teams. No idea how any of that works, but a conversation having a couple years from now.
All right.
All right, Dave, where to from here? Will Howard was at the NFLPA Rookie Premiere event over the weekend in LA. Alongside him was Kaleb Johnson. It's an annual event. A bunch of the skill guys from the rookie class get invited out there, and Howard did an interview with Kay Adams of the show Up and Adams, and not a particularly notable conversation, but a couple of nuggets there. Howard talked about his growing friendship with Ben Roethlisberger and viewing Ben as a mentor and potential mentor. And obviously was on Ben's podcast a couple weeks ago, shortly after being drafted. So those two guys seem to be having a pretty good start to their potential friendship, mentorship.
Yeah, some good quotes from Will Howard. I had to turn this one off as well too. To avoid drinking too much of the Kool-Aid. The guy answers every question fantastic. Doesn't really come off as a traditional rookie. Talked about already kind of I don't know. I don't mentor might be a little bit of a strong word, but in so many words says Ben Roethlisberger's been real helpful to him so far. He talked about his type of leadership and how he likes to lead. Talks about he was asked by Kay Adams, uh, what what do Steeler fans expect him to be? And he talked about being a gritty blue collar type guy and willing to lead by example and those type of things. So it was a shorter type interview, but I thought he handled it very very well, and just another feather in his cap that you look forward to, especially a young player coming out of college, a drafted player, and at the quarterback position as a whole. And look, I mean, well, you wouldn't expect him to get any playing time during the regular season, but as you wrote over the last several days here, that 60 something quarterbacks, I think you said, took snaps last season there, and we'll see what happens with Aaron Rodgers or whatnot, but there's always a distinct possibility that your number 3 quarterback has to see playing time at some point during the season. And look, most notably, I'm really excited to start hearing about Will Howard once the OTAs get underway, once mandatory minicamp gets underway, and then obviously once training camp gets underway. But you do have to wonder, if indeed a guy like Aaron Rodgers does ultimately sign, you got basically you would have 3-4 new quarterbacks in that room overall, with Skylar Thompson and Will Howard being at the bottom of that depth chart. You have we'll see what the timing is on Aaron Rodgers coming in. How many snaps during training camp potentially could a guy like Will Howard ultimately get?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be tough potentially. I mean, I just will say this Will Howard, the man can hold an interview. There's no question
Mhm.
about that. He is very good in these media type settings. It's easy to see why he was so likable, why a team like Pittsburgh would like the player and the person. And Kay Adams seemed to say the same after the conclusion of her interview. So we'll see. This will be Howard's time to potentially shine, because once the regular season starts, assuming it's Rodgers or some other veteran and Rudolph, that puts Howard number 3. It's limited reps. It's a lot of scout team type of work, but there's value in that. There's value in being the scout team quarterback and giving a good look for the opposing defense. And so that'll be one of Howard's roles, presumably once the season begins. Howard also said, Adams broached the topic of Aaron Rodgers. Has that come up at all? Has he thought about potentially being teammates with Aaron Rodgers? And Howard said he idolized Rodgers growing up and would love to be his teammate and to learn from him. So the right answer, of course, what else would Will Howard say? But I believe him, and we'll see if that happens.
The bad thing, once again, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but only having 3 preseason games, and we're sure to almost certainly at some point see that decrease, probably even more, unfortunately. But you know, uh, last year with Russell Wilson, how many plays did Russell Wilson end up playing? Now he probably would have played more if not for the calf injury and all like
Hmm.
that. But what did it end up being, like 12 snaps or 15 snaps or something like that?
I can
Offensive.
check. It was about that.
And then who else was
Well, actually,
behind
no,
him?
because he played like, wasn't he out there for the 6 drives, but the offense did nothing in that. Was it the Bills preseason game?
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank because obviously he missed. Didn't he miss like the first one?
Mhm. He did. He played just like the one preseason game because of the calf, and they just kept going 3 and out. I'm pulling it up now, but I don't know how many snaps it was. It was 26.
Okay,
He did
20.
played it actually played in the 3rd preseason game, just the opening series.
All right. Is that about what we would expect a healthy Aaron Rodgers to play, assuming he signs
Well, it's a really good question.
through
What
through
is
through 3 games?
Well, I think it partially depends on, okay, when does Aaron Rodgers sign, if he signs? If he's signing not until training camp and you miss the spring work, then maybe you wanna get additional work in preseason action. I don't know what historically Rodgers has done in the preseason. I'm guessing not a lot, given his age and health and all that kind of stuff. Did not play a snap in the preseason last year. In 2023, played 10 snaps. That was before the Achilles tear. Did not play in the 2022 preseason. Didn't play in 2021. Didn't play in 2020. You get the idea. So I think the over under on Rodgers preseason snaps will be very low.
And then obviously, a guy like Mason Rudolph from past time, but you don't know Mason Rudolph in the Arthur Smith sets.
Right. I think Rudolph is going to get a fair amount of work just so Smith can get more familiar with them, so those two guys can get a good understanding of each other. But either way, Rudolph's not going to play a ton of snaps. He's not playing in the fourth quarter of preseason games, which then would give guys like Howard and your four-string quarterback, we'll say Skylar Thompson, other opportunities. And I still will say that Howard, and we debated this, Howard is not guaranteed to make the roster, which means you want to give Thompson some time, let those guys battle and compete, which is just healthy to have good competition.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see if Rodgers signs before minicamp, whether that's the voluntary portion beginning May 27th, 6 days from now, or the mandatory edition, which begins in mid-June and lasts for 3 days.
All right.
Dave, just one other note we talked a lot about on the Monday show about Chris Olave, the Saints wide receiver, the reports that came out over the weekend from the Fan about Pittsburgh checking in on Olave. Apparently, this was confirmed by Albert Breer, who said the Steelers checked in on Olave early in the offseason. Don't have exact timeline of when this was, I guess, when Pittsburgh still had George Pickens on the roster, but they were, quote, rebuffed by the Saints. And so I think it's fair to say it was accurate that the Steelers did check in. Now the additional kind of punching up the reports of the Steelers are closing in on a deal for Olave. They're working on a deal for Olave. That seems to be too over the top as these stories kind of get, the fish gets bigger each time we tell the story kind of a deal. But Pittsburgh did seem to check in on Olave, although, as we expected, the Saints had no interest in dealing Chris Olave.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess the only thing I would like to know more in specifics was this before or after DK Metcalf was traded for, or was it right at the same time? It obviously would make sense for them to call, especially earlier in the offseason and all. And as we laid out the other day, just kind of looking at the plausibility, at least at this point moving forward, I think we both came to the conclusion it'd be quite surprising if the Steelers traded for Olave at this point. Now, however, if you got around the trade deadline, maybe things change at that point. But at least between now and the start of the regular season, I'd be quite surprised if the Steelers traded for Chris Olave. I'd be on board for it, especially if you could get him for, let's say a third or a fourth. But I don't think that's going to come to fruition.
Agreed, and all Breer says is early in the offseason when that was in relation to March when DK Metcalf was dealt for. I guess I would interpret that as before the Metcalf trade, because if you had Metcalf and still currently rostered Pickens, I don't know how much you're calling about other receivers at that point in time. And I mean, Metcalf came right before free agency. I'll assume the Olave discussion occurred before the Metcalf deal, even though I can't prove that.
That makes the most sense.
All right, Dave, let's talk about 2026. Our Ross McCorkle last week wrote about competition Pittsburgh could have. We know Pittsburgh is likely to be on the quarterback prowl for a first-round guy in 2026. They have 12 projected draft picks, potentially 5 in the first 3 rounds. Who is their competition? And Ross laid out some of the potential teams. The Cleveland Browns, of course, are going to be in the mix. The LA Rams could be in the mix depending on what happens with Matthew Stafford. Maybe the Saints, depending on what happens with Tyler Shuck this year. The Jets, depending on Justin Fields. The Colts, with their uncertain situation of Richardson and Daniel Jones, really critical year there. Ross also listing the Seahawks and the Raiders. I do think the Browns are going to be real big competition, in part because of the likelihood the Browns will have a worse record than Pittsburgh this year, and the fact the Browns have a pair of first-round picks in 2026.
Yeah, but they did spend 2. It'd be interesting to see what transpires with the Dylan Gabriel, Shadur Sanders stuff there, and see if any of those guys can come out of this season and give them any confidence in the position moving forward there. But they definitely will have the ammunition. As Ross writes, they have 9 projected picks right now, based on some compensatory, at least speculation, 2 first-round picks. So they have a lot of ammunition. The Rams is an interesting one there. Especially it sounds like the Rams will be back probably in the same situation with the Matthew Stafford contract after this season. There they have 10 projected picks, 2 first round picks, I believe. There with the Rams, the Saints. We'll see what happens there with Tyler Shuck, and they have 1 first round pick, 7 projected picks. The Jets will get a good look at Justin Fields obviously this year, and if things don't go the way they want it to, you could potentially, I mean, even if things do go fairly well, they could have a complete changing of the guard maybe once again, for all we know, even though Aaron Glenn's first year head coach and all there. So yeah, I think they're definitely in the picture there. The Colts with Anthony Richardson, what's going to happen there? The Seahawks, even though they went out and signed Sam Darnold this offseason, that looks to be a year-by-year contract, quite honestly, overall. So they could probably, if they behoove themselves, they could potentially be in the market. And then obviously the Raiders there and an older quarterback in Geno Smith. Is there any team that may be on the peripheral there that could be added to the list? Obviously, the Steelers are one of these teams, but he was just looking at the competition for the Steelers.
I'd have to go through the depth charts. You never know what could happen over the course of a season. Sure. Could Miami, if Tua doesn't work out? I think we mentioned those teams, or Reader mentioned those teams before. So you never know what happens if Trevor Lawrence has a really bad year and Liam Cohen thinks there's a new direction to go. I suppose that's plausible, although of course unlikely to occur. But if JJ McCarthy in Minnesota has a belly up season and Minnesota says, let's cut our losses, admit our mistake, and try again. What if Bryce Young regresses in Carolina and they decide what he showed at the end of last year was all a mirage? So you never know what could happen.
Joel Klatt from Fox Sports released his top 10 college quarterbacks for 2025. He's got Cade Klubnik out of Clemson, Arch Manning out of Texas, John Mater out of Oklahoma, Sam Levitt out of ASU, Drew Aller out of Penn State, Garrett Nussmeier out of LSU, DJ Lagway out of Florida, Lenoris Sellers out of South Carolina, Luke Altmaier out of Illinois, and Carson Beck out of Miami. Now, how many of those do you know at least a little about at this point?
Klubnik had a really good year last year. I think that's the guy I'm looking at. Sellers is athletic. I think some turnover issues with him, but there's a real upside in his game. Aller did improve, but it felt like he had a tough end of the season. Beck was once viewed as a first-round guy for the 2025 draft, and then had a bad year. I think he had an elbow injury, bunch of interceptions. He transferred. So yeah, I mean, I'm not super familiar with every name, and can't tell you a whole scouting report on everybody, but we'll have our summer scouting series, be watching them on Saturdays. And yeah, I think we're decently familiar with some of those names because some of those guys were potentially part of the 2025 class, Nussmeier, Aller, etc. Then they went back to school for the 2025 season.
Yeah, obviously I know a little bit about Klubnik, Arch Manning, Drew Aller, Nussmeier out of LSU. I don't think I've watched but just a few snaps of Sellers, and then obviously Carson Beck from his time at Georgia there. So once again, if you have YouTube TV, set your YouTube TV to record all these games from all these guys, so you get a better sense. And this list is sure to change as things go on.
I'm going to have our Jonathan Heitrader write up a list of potential, and it's hard to do, but a potential list of sleepers of who will be this year's Joe Burrow or Jackson Dart, the guy that no one's really talking about that could come out of nowhere and then suddenly vault themselves into that first round conversation. I'm curious to see what list he puts together. But to go back to the point from earlier, as you said, a bunch of teams on this list. You never know how things shake out. The Browns did draft 2 quarterbacks in Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders, but is that going to prevent them from taking a first-round guy if there's a guy they fall in love with next year? It's hard to see that happening. And also, what if the regime is gone? What if Stefanski's gone? What if Andrew Berry's gone, which isn't a crazy thought? If the Browns have another poor season where they have a chance to pick a blue-chip quarterback. So if it's a new regime, drafting Gabriel and Sanders isn't going to really mean a whole lot to them. So I think Pittsburgh could really be competing hard with Cleveland next year.
And then as far as this clat list of 10 quarterbacks here, how many of these guys are probably not guaranteed to potentially declare? Arch Manning, obviously. Do you know the status of some of these other guys, whether or not some of them might be underclassmen?
You're asking if these are underclassmen on this list?
How many of this group is? Obviously,
Yeah.
Arch Manning is.
Mm-hmm. Right, and many expect Manning to stay in school for quite some time, not come out in 2026. I don't know
What is
the list.
Lagway? Is
I
he?
couldn't tell you.
Yeah, I'll have to. A lot of these guys. I mean, I haven't watched the Oklahoma kid any.
Sellers is underclassmen, I'm pretty sure. I think Aller and Nussmeier are going to be seniors.
And Beck seems like he's been there for 10 years.
Yeah. Or at least
Been in
at
college for
Georgia, and then
10
he
years.
transferred. Yeah. So he should be a senior as well. So it's probably a list of half and half.
All right. What are the chances that the Steelers see enough of a guy like Will Howard and say, we'll roll the dice and, you know, even though all the speculation is that, it's in Pittsburgh, the draft's in Pittsburgh, they got the draft collateral. What if they end up, what position would they go if they went another position? Had to be wide receiver, right?
Well, the last receiver they took in the first round was Santonio Holmes, and then Burris. I mean, it's something that you don't generally do. I mean, it depends on the strength of the class and the talent that's there. It could be cornerback. It could be left tackle if Broderick Jones doesn't have a good season. But I wrote about this a couple weeks ago. Dave, does Pittsburgh feel almost obligated to take a quarterback? Because how do you build all this capital? And we talk so much about the 2026 class, and that's the year to take a quarterback. And then you say, it's a corner, guys. You sit there and say, well, who's our starting quarterback next year? So, you never want to feel like you're backed into a corner and have to take a position. But if you're Pittsburgh, it's hard to not take a quarterback as things stand today.
It would feel anticlimactic,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be a lot of disappointment, as much buzz as there is this far out right now.
Right, exactly. And the problem is when you feel obligated to do something, you start reaching, you start making mistakes, you start getting the 2022 class of, well, there's a quarterback need. We need a quarterback. We got to take the best guy there, even if he's not necessarily worth that pick and isn't the true franchise. And we've seen that at other positions at cornerback with Artie Burns, et cetera. So that is a concern, but something to bridge to cross next winter, I guess.
At the very least, I have a feeling we'll be tracking the Steelers around to a lot of quarterback pro days.
Oh, yeah, no question. They'll be on the pursuit as they should, but pursuing one and evaluating a class and taking a class or taking a player from that class are two different things in Pittsburgh. Unlikely to be the first team drafting a quarterback. I assume somebody will be ahead of them, so Pittsburgh won't have their pick of the litter the way they did in 2022, even though that proved to be the wrong year to take a swing on a quarterback, unless you've had that foresight on Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant.
All right.
Was there... To rewrite history, Pittsburgh, you can't fault them for not taking Brock Purdy in the first round. Obviously, no one thought he was a first-round guy, but you had a second chance at Brock Purdy, and they took Chris Oladokun about 20 picks ahead of Brock Purdy that year. You just wonder what could have been, what would have been if Purdy goes to Pittsburgh. Does he have the same success, or does he get cut like Chris Oladokun did a couple weeks in the training camp because there was no reps for him? You never know.
Yeah, if Brock Purdy lands anywhere else other than this situation and the injuries and all that the 49ers had went through at the quarterback position, there's no guarantee that had the Steelers even selected him, around earlier or whatnot, that especially the way the having already had drafted Kenny Pickett that year, and you had Mitch Trubisky and who
Mason.
else? And Mason, and I mean, would that just been a fourth wheel, and might he have gotten just a handful of snaps and been out the door and been on somebody else's roster anyway? So it's hard to know. Sometimes timing and opportunity, especially when it comes to these later round quarterbacks. Heck, Tom Brady, if Bledsoe never gets injured, and you don't get to see Tom Brady in the situation that he was put in and succeed, would we even be talking about Tom Brady in the light that we're talking about him after the fact?
Exactly. Circumstances make careers, to open doors, at least allow a player a chance to show what he can do. And that was true in San Francisco. What if Trey Lance doesn't get hurt? What if Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't get hurt? Does Purdy ever become the $53 million quarterback that he is today? who knows? It's the art of the draft of the NFL of sports.
Yep.
Okay, Dave, let's bring it back to the current draft class. You talked about a little bit on Kaleb Johnson, his pass protection. You have an article upcoming on his pass pro, an area that he even admitted he wants to work on, improve upon. So, what are your thoughts on Kaleb Johnson and pass pro in current form?
All right, first and foremost, we've talked kind of briefly about this, and Caleb, as you mentioned, talked during this process about that being an area that he would like to improve in. Let me ask you first. I had Pro Football Focus pull for me all of the snaps that were kind of deemed, at least what they scored as pass protection snaps for him during his entire college career. How many snaps would you guess that would be for his entire college career? What they deemed as pass protection snaps for Kaleb Johnson.
Well, he was there 3 years, full-time guy, really just the one. I don't even know a good reference point on it. I'm just completely
And I
numbered
know
out of
you
my
haven't seen
butt here.
I don't think I've shared the list with you
No,
yet.
I'm flying totally blind here. I'll say 80.
That's not a bad guess.
All right, I'll take it.
Overall. The number actually came in lower than that.
Wow.
You didn't miss by much though. I'll give you kudos for that. 63.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's a run-heavy offense.
Right, and a lot of these, when going through, at least I've gone through and I've found most of the 2022 ones. Have not touched 2023 yet, but I did go look at all of the 2024 ones, and there's a good 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think 7 of them where, man, you really scored that as a pass, as a pass block opportunity. Coming off play action and the ball's away, and he's leaking out he doesn't even touch anybody, and there's no one to touch. Type situation. So it's kind of loose within that 63 even, and especially the 2024 pass protection snaps as far as, man, you really had that scored as a pass protection snap.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do when I write these up, I'm going to only concentrate on the 2024 ones. And then I'm going to pull out the ones where, man, no sense even looking in that one because I don't even see how you can really grade it overall. But when looking at all the other ones, Alex, I came away fairly impressed overall. Now, I think kind of the narrative out there that it was that he had to cut quite a bit, but I think there's only like 2 of those in here.
Okay.
How many did you see was it just were you basing that off of just a handful that you had seen?
Yeah, I didn't write the report on Johnson, so I didn't do the in-depth study as I would have otherwise. I watched a couple games of his, and I did see. I'm trying to think back. My recollection was that he did cut a couple times, but also there were just times where he would drop his head whenever
Right.
on contact, and that's not cutting; it's just him dropping his eyes. But there were a couple of times he was asked to cut block, which he almost certainly wouldn't do at the NFL because no one teaches that. They don't cut block in pass pro anymore.
Yeah, and I don't have my complete notes together on this. I'm still finding the plays overall and clipping them and things like that. There were a couple instances where his technique I think needs to be better in dropping the head, but there are some there are a couple real nice pass protection snaps in here. And like I said, if you look at 2024 as a whole, I think there's 63 in total. 24 of those were from before 2024 season. So that leaves about 27, 28, I don't know. And then you subtract about 7 or 8 of those that aren't really. So there's not a lot to look at there overall, but what is there, I see a guy willing to do it, and I see some nice pass protection snaps in there. Is there room for improvement? I think more than anything, I think he shows the willingness. I think he shows the ability to pick out the guy to get. A couple of these I think are corners coming off the edge and things of that nature. I was expecting, at least in the 2024 reel, to be, you know, come away a little bit dissatisfied. But I think my basis of all this, especially when it comes to 2024 and Kaleb Johnson and pass protection, and once again, it's not a large selection. I think there's something to build on there.
Is it more about just consistency with him? Is that the big thing to work on?
Yeah, I would think technique more than anything, and just getting more reps. Having being put in more situations where he's having to do it. Now, I'm not saying that, oh, well, there's enough there that I would throw him back there in a third down situation. I think obviously Jalen Warren has established himself enough where initially out of the chute that he should be that guy. But if you're looking long term past this season, and look, he'll get a good test in backs on backers, and he was warned about that during rookie minicamp and kind of took it in stride. And I think he looks forward to that. There's going to be some. He's probably going to I bet he ends up representing himself pretty decent overall. Now, look, it's an unfair drill, right? When you're talking about these the backs on backers type drill, but I'm willing to bet overall he represents himself really well, and I think what he needs is he just needs more reps at it.
Mm-hmm. Do we have numbers on other running backs drafted around him and their pass protection, how often they did it? I know that Travion Henderson was regarded as probably the best pass protector in this year's class, one of the better pass protectors of the last couple classes. So be curious on just an opportunity standpoint, how his numbers stacked up to others.
I don't know that I have those numbers because I had to have PFF pull these specifically for me.
Okay, I like keeping things relative, but I think the point is it's fair to say Johnson did not get many opportunities, in part because of Iowa's offense, in part because he really didn't become the guy until his 2024 season. Only spent 3 years at Iowa, so it's a little bit of a blank slate. But as you said, he'll get that chance right away. It's the first day in pads. They'll do backs on backers. They do it again for Friday Night Lights, and so right away that first day in pads, he'll get a chance to make his mark or have the mark left on him.
All right, and once again, I'm going through these. I'll probably post about the 2024 ones in a contextualization, just so it'll make it easier for people to see kind of what's out there. I'm going to eliminate the ones that really nothing happened on, where I kind of deem not worthy even looking at there. But I think people are going to come away thinking, oh, okay, there's something to build on there. And once again, not a huge selection of plays overall, but enough there that I think it'll get some positive feedback overall.
All right, I'm looking forward to it. That's encouraging to hear overall. Let me just ask us a random question here, Dave. Who has more receptions in 2025 for Pittsburgh? Kaleb Johnson or Kenneth Gainwell?
Yeah, that's a good one. I would probably say Gainwell.
Whatever with Kaleb Johnson, play on first and second down enough. If Rodgers is your quarterback, he isn't afraid to check it down. I'll say Kaleb Johnson.
All right. He's definitely got some receptions in college and some big plays off of that, I think.
All right, Dave, anything else here to discuss? Still don't believe we have word on the Tush Push. People will know by the time they're listening to this. It sounds like they're still debating it. Jeffrey Lurie is speaking to the ownership group right now, fighting to keep it. So we'll table that discussion ourselves for Friday's show. Anything else here, Dave?
I don't. What about what Cam Hayward had to say?
Yeah, on his podcast, he had Derek Harmon on as a special guest, and Hayward relayed the story about the team's last international trip in 2013 to London, that loss against the Minnesota Vikings, which was Le'Veon Bell's rookie year, which is how long ago that was. Talked about everyone falling asleep once they arrived because of jet lag. They left too late. It wasn't a good schedule, and kind of goes back to Art Rooney's comments he made at the schedule release last week. We intend to have the same travel schedule in terms of the Dublin game against the Vikings in week 4. And so hopefully that plan changes or is done in a smarter way so the team is better rested for this contest.
I hope Cam Hayward reiterates that to Mike Tomlin. Says, look, things didn't go well the last time, and here's why. And I hope they take a long look at it.
I mean, Tomlin himself should know it because he was head coach of the team, and you probably don't forget something like that. So that is something to certainly examine. I know Pittsburgh, who is their operations coordinator? I just lost his name. I've talked about him a time or two before. Aiden Hennessy Nyland, not a name we discuss too often, but he is the head of team operations. And so, as you said, I'm sure Tomlin has a lot of input on how this will go, but a lot of this will be planned by the operations team, or at least the individual listed as such. One other thing I noted after our discussion about the Ireland game, the schedule release, Minnesota in international games, Dave, 4-0, best record in international games since they started playing those in 2007. And so they beat Green Bay. They beat Aaron Rodgers last year. They had Rodgers in a blender, had that pick six. That was your guy, Van Ginkel, pick six and Rodgers last year. They, of course, beat Pittsburgh in that London game. They beat the Browns, and they beat the Saints in other London games. So the Vikings have a pretty good track record overseas.
All right. But last year's results don't dictate this year's future. So
sure. Absolutely. But just something to note there. All right, Dave, anything else? If not, we can get to some reader emails and close out today's show.
I will or should, by the end of the day, have the signing bonuses for the undrafted free agents. The NFLPA number, it moved this morning there. So that indicates that these guys are under contract. I think we know now Sebastian Castro got a $25,000 signing bonus. We already knew that, let's see, DJ Thomas Jones, I think, got what, 30,000? Those are the two we know for sure. I would imagine the rest of them are under 25,000. So I hope to have that list of other 6 players up by the end of the day, do a full salary cap update at that point, and then write a little bit about cash spending and where this team sits ahead of potentially signing Aaron Rodgers here.
All right, looking forward to that, Dave. So without further ado, let's get to some reader emails.
All right. Richard Jameson writes in, I recently heard that Will Howard played almost exclusively out of the shotgun at Ohio State and that he has virtually no experience under center. Is that what you've seen? If so, is that a problem for the Steelers? I've also seen a video of Kurt Warner musing that current practice rules makes it even hard or even impossible to develop a quarterback because they are allowed so few snaps at the pro level. Do you agree? And do you see this as a barrier to Will Howard developing into an NFL caliber quarterback? The first part of this or the second part of this, as far as what Kurt Warner, I mean, we just kind of briefly touched in this show. How many snaps does a guy like Will Howard, especially if Aaron Rodgers signs, will Will Howard get during training camp? How many will he get during preseason? It does make it tough on these non-early round guys, especially behind new guys joining the team that are ahead of them on the depth chart. And sometimes you need that unexpected chance to get a chance. So long story short, it is a barrier to guys like Will Howard. Now, fortunately for Will Howard, he comes out having played a lot of college ball, but I mean, I don't think this is earth shattering here with Kurt Warner saying that current practice rules makes it hard or even impossible to develop a quarterback. But I mean, once again, you saw what happened with Brock Purdy. Now, that was obviously injury related and got him into regular season games. Who else is a quarterback that maybe back in a roster that got to develop some? I mean, you go back to Dak Prescott several years ago, but I mean, an injury to Tony Romo helped bring that along, right?
I believe so. That sounds right in my head. I think it was a summer thing with Romo there. Yeah, there's probably a ton of examples or several other examples you could point to. But yeah, I think it's tough to develop in the NFL in general with coaching changes and limitations on practice time and elimination of preseason games, which will only continue, it appears. So, yeah, I get that point. What was the first part of the question about Howard under center? I really wouldn't worry about that. Most college quarterbacks are in shotgun. Howard did work a little bit under center, and I think just overall he played in a more pro style offense that was more demanding, that had cadence and audibles and checks and put more on his plate than say a Jackson Dart where it was a clap and it was just a lot more simple type of offense. So I think it's pretty well understood that most college quarterbacks are coming out of shotgun systems, and Howard was asked to do more, played for an NFL coach and Chip Kelly, and have to dig into what he did at Kansas State too. I don't know how often he was under center and those types of things, but there was a fair amount put on his shoulders. So he's a smart guy. I think he'll be okay.
I think too much is whoever's pushing this narrative. How many college quarterback in today's college game? How many quarterbacks come out of college with a ton of under center experience?
Very few.
Very few, and you can tell some people probably haven't watched. Look, virtually no experience. I don't know how you'd qualify virtually no experience under center, but I will tell you this: Will Howard last year alone had roughly around 100 snaps under center, with 20 of those being dropbacks, and I think the rest being running plays. So it's not like he hasn't done it. And would you qualify that as virtually no experience when you have roughly 100 snaps? This is based on Sports Info Solution stuff, and I did not break it down by any other quarterbacks that might have taken snaps other than Will Howard, but I would imagine Will Howard took 98% of the snaps at Ohio State last year. So let's just say that 100 snap under center was all him. Would you qualify that as virtually no experience under center?
I would not know.
I would not either. So some people haven't watched the tape and haven't done their homework on this.
Yeah, again, it's not really a concern of mine. And it's not like this guy has to play right away. He's going to get reps in already got reps in rookie minicamp, going to get reps in OTAs, in mandatory minicamp, and training camp, preseason practice. So this is not the guy that has to sit there and take the first snap in week one against the Jets. So I'm just not that concerned.
All right. Daniel Woodruff writes in, hey, David Knox, love the show. Been listening for years from Manchester, England. It's possible you've already touched on this, but I was wondering what your thoughts about the Bengals rookie contract situation. Are the Bengals just being cheap, or is there something else going on? He says, P.S. Dublin is just a short hop from here, and I'm hoping to snag tickets to my first Steelers game ever. Steelers game this year after being a fan since the Seattle Super Bowl days. Wish me luck. Well, definitely good luck, Daniel. I hope you're able to go to that game in Dublin. I would imagine that would be a hell of a damn experience. Should you be able to pull that off, keep us posted if you're able to get tickets on that. Second, I believe he's who's the draft pick that's not doing anything?
Shamar Stewart and Demetrius Knight, I believe, were the two.
Right. I don't think this is look, these contracts are slotted, but there is some wiggle room in certain aspects as far as, I don't know, split salaries, roster bonuses. I don't think the total value overall is impacted overall. I just think there's just some language in there and some guarantees versus non-guarantees that's got some of the holdup within here. What round was Stewart?
First round pick.
First round pick. So, I mean, it should be a fully guaranteed contract there. There's probably just maybe some offset stuff and, I don't know, some bonus payout timetable type stuff that's negotiating there. Normally with the first round picks overall, there's not a lot really to have to worry about in today's NFL, especially now that line has moved outside of the first round into where you get worried is your second round picks in the time to get him signed because of the line in the sand moving as far as the guarantees. So I know the Bengals are an easy target when it comes to the guarantees aspect, and maybe it is them being cheap on some aspect of this, but it's probably some unique language or I don't know, offset or it's probably mostly language related overall that's keeping him. And he's just being advised not to partake in any of these practices until he gets the thing done. Will they get him signed before training camp gets open? Probably. I don't think you see any guys go into training camp unsigned at this point here. But I don't think this. I mostly think this is language related.
Well, there's two elements. There's the rookie contract, which is still being worked on. Not that unusual for a first round pick to not assign at this point. But the other issue and the more pressing immediate concern is he's not practicing in rookie minicamp, in phase two of the offseason. And what most rookies will do in that situation who have not signed their
Sign a
contract
waiver.
is sign that injury waiver. And he is choosing to not do that. And it's unclear if that's just out of abundance of caution for himself, or is there some language in that injury waiver that's not offering the proper amount of protection that other teams like Pittsburgh does. Derek Carmen, not under contract right now. He went to rookie minicamp, he signed the waiver, all that kind of stuff. And so that seems to be the immediate thought about is there an issue with the waiver, or is Stewart just wanting to be super play it safe until that rookie contract is officially signed?
Yeah, I can't speak to that. I mean, that's it'd be interesting to know, a guy like Joe Corey's input on that. Because I would be under the impression that probably most of those injury waivers are probably standardized, but maybe they're not.
Right. You would think so. You think they'd be pretty boilerplate language, but the Bengals do have a reputation for being cheap. And is there something there? We just don't know. Should
Yeah.
mention, by the way, Dave, that it sounds like Derek Harmon probably gets his deal done here pretty soon, with the other draft picks around him have basically all signed their contracts.
Yeah, he's getting boxed in at this point. I think really the only person ahead of him is I think on both sides he's boxed in. Two spots above him by
Emeka Buka.
Buka. But the spot right ahead of him is the safety at Denver. Who's that?
Jade Barrett.
Yeah, he's yet to sign, but the guy I think the two or three right after Harmon's already signed. So it'll happen soon.
Yeah, there's pick 18, pick 19 have signed, pick 20, which is Barron, has not, Harmon at 21 has not, and then right behind him is Amarian Hampton of the Chargers and Matthew Golden of the Packers at 22, 23, they have signed, and so there's really no wiggle room there. I think Harmon probably gets his deal done before OTAs even begin.
Yeah, either this weekend or by sometime Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week when OTAs are underway. I'll be surprised if he's not under contract by the time those first OTAs in.
And he's the last draft pick not to sign, yet to sign, which is common. So once that gets done, the entire class is good to go.
Let's see if I can find maybe one more email here. No, we got the pre-merger stuff. I passed that email on to. Let's see, one more from Bill Ewan. Love the content, respect your opinions. I hear a lot, especially from Alex. The Steelers are in a weird state. Did we already talk about this? I don't know. Where they don't know if they're building for the future or contending now. I see them as building for the future. First round, Harmon, DK, and then filling gaps to contend after that. Slay, Rodgers. I'm curious what you would think, what you think they would have done differently this offseason if they were only trying to rebuild, and if you would rather have done that. I'm not sure what he's trying to say. He says in a weird state where they don't know if they are building for the future or contending now. He says, I see them as building for the future because of Harmon and DK, and then filling in the gaps to contend after that with Slay and Rodgers. I'm curious what you think they would have done differently this offseason if they were only trying to rebuild. So he's saying, what do we think they would have done differently this offseason if they were only trying to rebuild?
Well, for starters, you're not playing this waiting game for Aaron Rodgers, for a 41-year-old quarterback who's only here in all likelihood for just one season. You're not exploring that as a quarterback option in long waiting game. That's kind of my main point about you trade Pickens in one hand for future. You're pursuing Rodgers for now. Are you in? Are you out? That's kind of the basis of where I made that point from.
Okay. And this team has really just had the same MO this time, regardless of the situation that they're in. You see them go out and moderately address. The only thing really different is what they did with DK Metcalf and how out of the norm that was for them this year. So I suppose if they weren't trying to play for the now, well, I mean, DK's both a now and a
Yep.
later type thing. So I mean that gets put in both buckets. I don't know what he's really after here.
Well, I think he's saying he says he thinks Pittsburgh is building for the future, that they're not necessarily as focused on winning now. And he's saying that our standpoint is that Pittsburgh's kind of trying to do both, win now and win later. And he's saying, what would it look like in our mind? What would we have to see to be convinced they are just building straight up for the future?
Okay.
I mean, Harmon. Yeah, I mean, listen, any first round pick's going to be for the
Right.
future too. That's why you're drafting them. So whether it was Harmon, whether it was whoever else would have been in that bucket. I mean, I think the vision for Pittsburgh. I wrote about this 2-3 weeks ago. Was they're using 2023 through the 2025 drafts to build up the trenches. 2023 and 2024 was the offensive line. Broderick Jones, Trey Fautanu, Zach Frazier, Mason McCormick. Heavy investments in the O line. That group has to develop and play well. We all know that, but that was the intent. 2025 D line. Derek Harmon, Y.A. Black, Jack Sawyer, build the front seven, get good in the trenches. That very much get back to our roots style, the Andy Weidel influence of how those Eagles teams were built. That's the vision. 2026, you get the quarterback. And so if you can do all those three things, and those are big things to do, but build up the O-line, build up the D-line, and find your quarterback, you have the foundation in place. Then you fill in the rest. You have a quarterback on a rookie contract. You can go spend more in free agency and build the everything else, better that way. But if you have the offensive line, the defensive line, the quarterback, you have the nuts and bolts to be a Super Bowl contending type of team. I think that's the vision that they're trying to work with in a big picture 5-year plan kind of sense.
All right, well put. Let's take one more here from Mike Shorter. Great podcast and website content. Love it. Please rank these offensive-minded questions from 1 to 3. 1 equals no, 2 equals maybe, 3 equals yes. Just like the notes I used to send to the girls in grade school. You choose if you want to assume Rodgers. You choose if you want to assume Rodgers and added wide receiver injuries, etc. Kaleb Johnson will be the starter before the bye week 5. 1 no, 2 maybe, 3 yes.
I'll say maybe.
I'll say maybe as well. I see this thing being a committee. I don't know if he'll be. I mean, are we talking about first play of the game rolled out technically the starter? I mean,
That's how I would define it.
Okay, I would say maybe on that. But I do see more of a committee approach with this, especially as time goes on here. Team rushing yards per game will be better than 2024 stat of 127.4 yards a game.
Gets a little bit tricky with some of the stuff Fields brought, even in those only 6 weeks, but I will say yes. I will say is that 1 or 3, but I'll say yes.
Yeah, that's 3, and I'll say it better be yes. Let's see. Steelers will have more than 1 Pro Bowl player on offense, and I imagine this is true Pro Bowl selections, not fill in
7th alternate, yeah.
Yeah, 7th alternate type things. The Steelers will have more than 1 Pro Bowl player on offense.
No, I think they get. Can you get to 1 is the first question. I think Zach Frazier is maybe the most likely name. I know people will say DK and potentially, but he's never been a volume kind of a guy. And you're in an AFC where you got a bunch of good receivers, starting with the Bengals. Chase is right his name in pen for Pro Bowl right there, and whoever else ends up being in the mix. I'll say it's just 1.
I'll say the hope is that it's at least 1, and I'll go along with you and hoping that Frazier can crack that nut this year. Team passing yards per game will be better than 2024 stat of 212.2 yards per game.
It's a good question. I don't know what Rodgers was at last year. I mean, these things, and it's part of the question, but circumstance, you think Pittsburgh's winning a lot of games? If they are, they're running the ball more. If they're behind, they're throwing the ball more. So it's kind of a little bit about circumstance and all that. Rodgers averaged 229.2 last year. What was the number? The reader gave?
212.2.
Rodgers has never been under that in his starting career. Lowest was 217.4 in 2022. I'll take the over.
I'll go with you on that. Team passing over the middle will be better than the 2024 stat of 94 passes. Oh, wow.
I'll say yes,
I'll
assuming Rodgers comes.
Yeah, I'll say yes. Steelers will score 5 opening drive touchdowns this year. Oh Lord, that seems miles away. I'm going to say no.
Same. Would love to be wrong. They did not score one last year. They have the second longest drought active in the NFL, I believe. Is it Chicago or Seattle? One of the two teams is a slightly longer drought than Pittsburgh, but would love it. Believe it when I see it. I'll say no.
Here's a good one. The quarterback will be sacked less than 40 times. Less than 40. So 39 or fewer.
It's kind of close to maybe territory. Rodgers has a quick snap to throw time. The O-line is a big question mark, big X factor this year. To not hedge and say maybe, I'll say yes, under 40 sacks.
I'm going to go maybe on that. I'm going to hedge on that.
Fair. That's fair.
That's an interesting number. I wonder where the readers would come in on that one particularly. 39, especially last. How many times were they sacked last year?
More than 40. That's for sure. I can pull up the number.
Around
It was
50.
It sounds, I think, even north of that, but I will check here with Russ and Fields combined. 49.
Okay.
49 sacks. Russ 33, Fields 16.
All right. I'll go a firm maybe on that. All right. So we got through that one. All right. We're about an hour and a half into this. I want Alex to kind of not have to deal with me so much on his birthday. I think that should be a birthday in and of itself present there. But Alex, once again, happy birthday to you. And let's see, you and I will get together again on Friday. And as I mentioned, I hope to have the undrafted free agent signing bonuses up later today. Full cap report. I'll be working on Kaleb Johnson pass protection, contextualization. What else? What do you got coming, Alex?
For the morning, I'll have 4 stats the Steelers offense must fix for 2025. So kind of in similar vein to what we just talked about, a little more analytics, some of the advanced stats Pittsburgh really needs to improve on, and also some more surface level. I'll give you one. Red zone, for example. Pittsburgh 29th in red zone offense last year. I forget what the percentage was. It was not good. And so red zone has been a big problem for Pittsburgh for several seasons now, whether that was different quarterbacks, different coordinators. It must get better in 2025.
All right. Look forward to that. Okay. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter /X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Get on there and wish him happy birthday today. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. Also, if you like an ad-free version of the site, SteelersDepot.com, hit the ad-free button. And I think that's got all of it out of the way. Until Friday. Happy birthday one last time, Alex. As always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.